Justin Trudeau literally just said one of the most ignorant things that a sitting prime minister could possibly say, especially in a year where inflation is running so high and the Bank of Canada is renewing its mandate. And I'm going to discuss exactly what was said and why it is so problematic, especially given the current circumstances. But before we do that, do me that favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and please hit that like button so more people like you can see this video. And don't forget about our race to 25,000 subscribers, where one lucky subscriber is going to win $5,000 to put into their RESP, their RSP, their TFSA, to pay down their debt, pay down their mortgage, or simply do with whatever they like. Maybe they'll use it for a down payment. But the one thing that is certain is that in order to win, you have to be subscribed. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. It's free, it's easy, and it's definitely worth it. The definitive guide on how to manage your credit: product, penalty, price, in that order. It's never been more important to get your mortgage right. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's discuss what Justin Trudeau said. And I have to preface this with, I am politically agnostic. I know it's somewhat ignorant of me to say I don't care which party runs the country, but I really typically don't identify with any of the parties, whether it be NDP, Conservative, or Liberal. I tend to vote along the lines of what I think is best for the country at the time. And this by no means is a political video. It's not meant to encourage you to vote one way or another. It is simply meant to discuss the absolutely insane comments that Justin Trudeau made with respect to inflation. And here's what he said. He said, "When I think about the biggest, most important economic policy this government, if re-elected, would move forward, you'll forgive me if I don't think about monetary policy. You'll understand that I think about families." Now, this is a really interesting comment. It is really, as an economist, it is probably the most ignorant thing, like I said in the intro, that a sitting prime minister could say. Because if you are genuinely thinking about families, you can't ignore inflation. It is as simple as that, because inflation is the thing that drives costs for families and is the single biggest factor when it comes to the economic viability and the economic success of an individual family. So for a sitting prime minister to say, hey, I don't care about monetary policy, well, guess what? You're being pretty ignorant when you say, I don't care about that, because inflation is that thing that is basically driving the economy, and the cost of goods, the cost of living, the cost of housing, everything else is really what matters to Canadians. It's how am I going to function on a daily basis? And if the costs of goods are going up, then guess what? That adversely affects families. It horribly affects families. Like, to say that I think about families but I ignore inflation is pretty ignorant. And, you know, like you said, I'm not taking a political position here, but what I am taking is a position of just pointing out the clear problems with the current government. And to me, this comment that Justin Trudeau has made is the clearest indication that the worst thing that could happen to Canadians from an economic perspective going forward is a clear mandate for the Liberal government, or a clear majority for the Liberal government. We cannot have that happen if this is going to be the position that Canadian government takes when it comes to economic policies. Now, let me show you a little bit more about why this is so problematic, because if we jump into the news headlines, this is from the Globe and Mail, and this is a really great article by a guy named Mark Rendell, where it talks about the election campaign and inflation setting up the perfect storm for a usually sleepy review of the Bank of Canada's monetary policy. Because here's what's happening this year is, and this isn't something that's happened ever before, or at least it hasn't happened very often, and that is that the Bank of Canada's mandate is up for review. So what this means is that the Bank of Canada, on a 5-year basis, goes back to the federal government and says, here's how we believe that we should be handling inflation and the economy over the next 5 years. So over the last 5 years, what they've been doing is what's called flexible inflation targeting. And what that means is that they're trying to hit a certain target, which is 2%, but they've got the flexibility to run higher or lower than that, either up to 3% or down to 1%. And they're trying to stay within that narrow band. Now, currently what they're looking at is 6 different alternatives. The 2 leading ones are what's called dual mandate and average inflation targeting. So what dual mandate is instead of looking at just inflation, it looks also at employment. This is the type of regime that the Federal Reserve Bank in the US has been running since the 1970s. They don't only look at inflation, but they also look at jobs, and they see their function as a dual role, which means that they are trying to not only keep inflation within a certain target, but also trying to make sure that jobs are at a high enough number that the economy continues to roll, and so that people can afford to live the livelihood that they want to live. Now, the second type is the average inflation targeting, which is essentially where the Bank of Canada is allowed to let the economy run hot at higher than normal inflation after a period of time where inflation has been very, very low. So that over a longer period of time, they're trying to get an average inflation rate in that, let's call it a 2% range. So rather than trying to consistently keep inflation at that 2% range, they're trying to run at an average over a period of time. So a little bit of a different policy. And that type of policy would make sense during a time like right now, where you're trying to see inflation increase to make up for the lower costs that happened during the pandemic. Now, both the dual mandate and the average inflation targeting basically gives the Bank of Canada the tools to not only control inflation, but to also have a little bit of leniency in order to make sure that jobs come back into play. Now, going back and thinking about this from the perspective of Justin Trudeau's comments is, when you look at this and you look at the mandates that the Bank of Canada is looking at, they're looking at things like jobs and costs of things that are going on. Now, when you go back and you take a look at this from the perspective of Justin Trudeau's comments, the Bank of Canada is looking at their future mandate from the perspective of how do we take care of families by making sure they have jobs and making sure that costs of goods don't run out of control. But Justin Trudeau is saying, hey, forgive me if I don't think about this, and forgive me if that's not my priority. Well, you know what? Guess what? It should be Justin Trudeau's priority. And it really should be something that the federal government is paying attention to, especially given the fact that the Bank of Canada, as soon as the next federal government sits, is going to make the recommendation of what they want to do, and that the federal government at that point in time is going to have to approve that mandate. So this should not just be something that Justin Trudeau is thinking about, but it should also be something that is on the forefront of Justin Trudeau's mind. Now, to further this conversation and talk a little bit more about all of the things that are happening as a result of his comments, we've got David Dodge, who has come out and said flat out, Justin Trudeau is wrong. David Dodge being a former governor of the Bank of Canada, and he's basically blasting Justin Trudeau on this monetary policy quip, basically saying, I think he should take it back. I'm not totally surprised. Neither Trudeau number 1 or Trudeau number 2 have been terribly interested in monetary policy, very unfortunately. In any event, he's wrong. The new government has a very important set of decisions to make coming up on monetary policy and in terms of the renewal of the agreement with the Bank of Canada. So this is David Dodge, one of the foremost financial minds in the country, saying, Justin Trudeau, give your freaking head a shake. And then you go a little bit further and you take a look at what is happening with respect to people who are in the investment industry, and they are saying he needs to be careful. We are not the US, and we don't have the type of currency that allows us to say, hey, we're not going to pay attention to this. It's not really a big deal. Bank of Canada, do whatever you need to. And the reason why he's making this comparison to the American economy is because the American economy is a well-respected currency. It's strong, and they can make mistakes. They maybe don't have to pay attention as much as Canada does. But if Canada puts itself in a position where our currency begins to get devalued, it could have serious ramifications for the economy overall. So, there's been a lot of conversation the last 6 years about Justin Trudeau and whether he's the right guy to lead the country. The one thing that really bothers me, and I've been a defender in the past of Justin Trudeau, especially early on in his time as Prime Minister. But the thing that bothers me is that he always speaks from a place of speaking points and not from a place of actual common sense. And again, whether this was a talking point that was given to him by his people or something that he truly believes, it is just something that is an absolutely ignorant thought process with respect to the economy and monetary policy overall. So this is where, I'm not going to try to convince anybody to vote one way or the other. I'm, like I said, politically agnostic, but this is the place where I personally cannot cannot support Justin Trudeau going forward in the Liberal government. And my sincerest hope is that we find ourselves in another place where we have a government that is a minority government, not a majority government, with more checks and balances in place, because with thought processes like this running the economy, we would be in serious, serious trouble if the Liberal government had the opportunity to go out and run the economy at will in whatever way they saw, without thinking about things like the very important decisions ahead of them with respect to monetary policy. So if you found this video useful, do me that favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Please hit that like button so more people like you see this video. Don't forget about that race to 25,000 subscribers. And seriously, you need to pay attention to what's going on in this federal election, because it's stuff like this that has me really, really concerned about the future of the Canadian economy. We'll see you on the next video. Cheers.